Outsourcing list building to the Philippines. Pros and cons. Why cheap lists become expensive pipeline problems. You can buy thousands of contacts in minutes, but most B2B teams learn the hard way that volume doesn't equal pipeline. When emails bounce, titles are wrong, and people left the company months ago, your SDRs spend more time repairing data than running outreach. That's how a $99 list quietly turns into weeks of wasted dialing, inbox damage, and missed quota. Outsourcing list building to the Philippines is popular because it can reduce prospecting labor costs by 40 to 70% while keeping your sellers focused on conversations instead of spreadsheets. The catch is simple. If you outsource list building like it's a commodity purchase, you'll get commodity data. And commodity data is the fastest way to poison an outbound engine. In our work as a B2B sales agency and sales outsourcing partner, we've seen the pattern repeatedly. List building works when it's treated like a production system with specs, QA, and feedback loops. It fails when it's treated like a one-time export. The goal isn't more leads, it's the right accounts, the right personas, and contact data you can actually use in cold email and cold calling services. Why the Philippines became the default market for list-building talent. The Philippines has a mature outsourcing ecosystem built for exactly this kind of repeatable sales support work. In 2024, the Philippine IT BPM industry generated roughly $38 billion in revenue and continued growing year over year, which signals real operational depth, not a new BPO market still figuring things out. For list-building services, that maturity shows up as stable management layers, proven hiring pipelines, and teams that already understand how to work with U.S. go-to-market motions. The talent pool is also deep enough to scale without breaking your process. The IT BPM workforce reached about 1.82 million employees in 2024, and the broader pipeline is supported by more than 680,000 plus university graduates each year. Practically, that means you can start with one researcher and still have a realistic path to a pod model, research plus enrichment plus QA when volume increases. Finally, list quality depends on language nuance, and the Philippines consistently performs well for English proficiency. The country scores 569 on the EF English Proficiency Index, well above the global average, which matters when researchers need to interpret titles, infer seniority, and navigate US-focused business terminology. When you're outsourcing research for a cold calling agency or outbound sales agency workflow, that nuance is the difference between reaching decision makers and spamming the wrong department. Outsource tasks, not strategy. The hybrid model that actually works. The most reliable setup is a hybrid workflow. We keep ICP definition, segmentation logic, and messaging decisions in-house, while a Philippines team handles the labor-intensive research. That means they execute account discovery, contact discovery, enrichment, emails, phones, LinkedIn URLs, and periodic hygiene passes, while your internal team owns judgment calls like which vertical to test next and what qualified means. This is also where the economics make sense. If your US SDRs cost a median $60,000 base with around $85,000 OTE, every hour spent on basic list building is an expensive misallocation of selling capacity. Outsourcing that workload supports an outsourced sales team model where your SDRs spend time on calls, follow-up, and objection handling, not building CSVs. Cost arbitrage is real, but it's not the whole story. For example, one benchmark shows a role costing around $6,648 per year in the Philippines versus $58,803 per year in the US, a difference of roughly $52,155 per employee. The winning play is to reinvest part of those savings into better tooling, QA, and management, so your output improves, not just your expense line. How to launch a Philippines list-building program without breaking quality. Start with a one-page ICP and a data dictionary that removes guesswork. Define target industries, geographies, employee bands, buying roles, and disqualifiers. Then document required fields with examples. For instance, how you want job titles normalized, whether you need HQ versus regional offices, and how to format LinkedIn URLs. When a provider gets a crystal clear spec instead of more leads, list quality climbs fast. Next, run a tightly scoped pilot of 500 to 1,000 records before you scale. Test 2 or 3 providers in parallel and score them on practical outcomes: bounce rate, decision maker coverage, duplicate rate versus your CRM, and responsiveness to feedback. If you only compare vendors on price per contact, you'll usually reward the team that skips verification steps. Finally, operationalize the handoff into your outbound engine. Use templates that match your CRM field map. Route imports through a staging step for validation and dedupe, and assign a single internal data owner, often RevOps, who reviews each batch and feeds corrections back to the researchers. This is the difference between list building as a vendor purchase and list building as a production workflow that supports cold email, agency, and B2B cold calling execution. The cheapest list is rarely the lowest cost lead source because bad data gets paid for again in bounces, wasted dials, and lost selling time. Quality control, the KPIs and SLAs that keep your CRM clean. Most teams underestimate how brutal bad data is for revenue. Research suggests around 70% of CRM data is outdated, incomplete, or inaccurate, and reps can lose roughly 500 hours per year working around it, nearly a quarter of their selling capacity. If you're investing in cold calling companies, telemarketing, or an SDR agency, you can't afford to have your outreach engine fueled by guesswork. Treat your Philippines researchers like a strategic partner and manage them on outcomes, not activity. That means setting explicit quality KPIs, accuracy, completion, bounce rate, duplicates, and pairing them with a feedback loop that's fast enough to fix systemic issues before they hit your CRM. A simple internal audit of 5 to 10% of each batch is usually enough to catch patterns early and keep standards consistent. Below is a practical baseline we see work well for B2B teams running outbound at scale. You should adjust targets based on your market, the data sources you allow, and whether you're prioritizing direct dials, verified emails, or account coverage. Common failure modes and how to prevent them. The most common mistake is buying massive, cheap lists without a clear ICP or field definition. You end up with the wrong industries, regions, and titles, which forces SDRs to waste dials and damages email deliverability with bounces. The fix is operational, not motivational. Lock the ICP, define mandatory fields, and make the provider prove adherence during the pilot before you increase volume. The next failure mode is treating offshore researchers as order takers instead of collaborators. When a team can't ask questions or push back on vague criteria, they'll still fill the spreadsheet, and your program will quietly degrade. A dedicated point of contact, a short overlap window for daily clarifications, and direct feedback on audited records turns your list building into a learning loop instead of a guessing game. Compliance and security are the final blind spot, especially for teams prospecting into the EU or California. Even if list building is done offshore, you're still accountable for how data is handled under GDPR and CCPA, and your partner should also understand the Philippines Data Privacy Act and basic controls like access management, retention, and deletion. If a provider can't explain their data handling process clearly, that's a bigger risk than any pricing advantage. Bigger risk. Turning time zone differences into a 24/7 prospecting advantage. The Philippines' GMT +8 time zone can be a feature when you design for it. While your US sellers sleep, a research pod can enrich tomorrow's target accounts, validate new contacts, and refresh titles for active sequences. This is one of the simplest ways to increase outbound throughput without increasing SDR headcount. To make that work, standardize communication so questions don't stall progress. Use a short daily overlap window for approvals, then keep everything else asynchronous with written specs, annotated examples, and batch-level scorecards. The teams that win here don't manage harder. They reduce ambiguity so the provider can produce clean output without constant back and forth. Tooling matters too, but it's not enough on its own. Strong providers combine human judgment with a modern stack, often including LinkedIn Sales Navigator, data providers like Apollo or ZoomInfo, and verification tools like NeverBounce. Then triangulate sources to reduce errors. When this feeds directly into your sequencing and your cold call services workflow, you're optimizing cost per meeting, not cost per row in a spreadsheet. What to do next? A practical path to scaling without vendor lock-in. If you're choosing between freelancers and an agency, decide based on operational tolerance. Freelancers can be cheaper, but you inherit training, QA, coverage risk, and process design. A managed team typically brings supervision and redundancy that keeps output consistent. For most B2B teams that want predictable pipeline, starting with a managed provider is the safer route, then moving to a captive model later once volume and process maturity justify it. Plan your ramp realistically and judge performance on the right timeline. With a clear ICP and data spec, a good provider can deliver an initial, usable batch in about 1 to 2 weeks. But you should expect 30 to 60 days of iteration before you see stable, scalable quality. During that ramp, keep measurement tight, bounce rate, persona accuracy, duplicates, and meetings per 1,000 contacts, so you can correct early instead of cleaning your CRM later. At SalesHive, we built our process around this exact hybrid model: strategy and performance management close to the customer, and scalable research capacity that keeps data fresh. That approach supports both companies that only need list-building services and teams that want a broader sales outsourcing solution that includes cold email, B2B cold calling services, and appointment setting. Whatever route you choose, the standard stays the same. Optimize for data quality and alignment first, and the cost savings will follow.